This is Kal Kat, the Kal Katster, and welcome to another night of unofficial creature features. At the Haunted House of Horror, or The Dark. Not the remake from 2020, but no, the original 1969 one is a whodunit, more than it's a haunted house movie. A bunch of swinging 1960s partygoers, young college students, I guess, decide after a swinging party and swapping girlfriends and drinking and drugs, decide to, and smoking cigarettes, because they did that back then, decide to go to a haunted house that's down the lane. And they're British. It's a British movie. They go to this old haunted house and decide to do spooky stuff in there and scare each other and stuff. Ghost hunting, you see. Before Ghost Hunters, of course, which was a mid-2000s show. Long before that. Long before Ghostbusters in the 80s. Long before the other thing. They go to the haunted house. There's no guest. So they monkeyed around. The creature features guys monkeyed around with each other. At one point, Tangela tries to turn the groundkeeper into a ghost, kind of giving away a little bit of what happens next in the story. Also, there is appearance by the painting of Sarah who pops off the wall. There's another Sarah in this. You see, she's a painting, and she does the Dorian Gray / painting a sort of looking glass thing, and pops up into reality. And says there's a stench in here. Oh, that's pretty funny. It wasn't no relation to any Sarahs I know, but it was somebody named Sarah. Anyway, yeah, not too many comments in the comment section. This is not going to be a long review. It's going to be real short because there wasn't much in the movie, so it's real short. Yeah, it had a Frankie L on it, but not an Ed Viticello. It had a girl that looked like the girl from the Moody Blues, but I think it was just her hair, because a lot of them had bangs in the movie. They all had well-defined teeth as well. I thought that was interesting. British movies, they usually have cigarette-stained teeth. Yeah, not in this one. Yeah, so somebody gets killed in the haunted house, and then somebody gets stabbed, and then rather than going to the police, they decide to bury the body, and then the story turns into a whodunit at that point. There's two red herrings early on, two of the men. There's a twist. So in mystery stories, as well as sci-fi stories, there's 4 or 5 different concepts for a story. And you can usually tell the way they cookie cutter things. Especially the case in the horror sitcom Murder, She Wrote, where you could totally tell, like, mystery novel thing. You could tell literally who the bad guy was from the opening scene. In this one, no different, really. Everybody in the credits guessed who the bad guy was going to be. It's not the guy in the first 10 minutes like some of them might do. Man versus man, man versus nature, man versus the supernatural, man versus himself. They went for himself. It was not going to be supernatural. It wasn't going to be ghosts, just based on how the way they structured it. It wasn't going to be the first guy you saw because that didn't. It's not going to be jealousy or something like that because that would be the second one. No, it was going to be man versus himself. And they were going to have the reveal. It's the one you don't know in the third act who pops in. That was actually the killer. It wasn't the guy that you think that looks creepy that's walking around, because that's too obvious. He's a red herring. It wasn't the cop guy, of course. It wasn't one of the ladies, although they kind of implied that the heavy-set, well, normal-looking lady, really. She wasn't heavy-set. She was just normal-looking. The others was kind of skinny and gaunt. She was normal-looking. One with a sort of a chin going on. Yeah, nothing going on. She was. Yeah, she didn't have a strong chin. Yeah. But then she could have that work done on the chin later. in the future. No. This character in the story. Yes. But yes, the character in the movie. Not the one that looked like the girl from the Moody Blues. That was somebody else. And then we have the cops going to everybody and interviewing them. And they threw out another red herring of the bitchy lady with the black hair, because the brunette didn't do it. He figured that the heavyset girl didn't do it, because that would be too obvious. The bitchy lady didn't do it. That's too obvious. They pull that away all the way to the end to try and make it look like an Agatha Christie kind of thing. They don't get away with it. And finally, at the end, they revealed that the killer was and it's from the 60s, so spoiler. The killer was actually the mousy guy that didn't say much. He's the third one. And he explains to the other male lead that he had a connection to the house, and he was the one that wanted him to go there because he was locked in a cellar as a child, and it freaked him out because he was afraid of the dark, and it made him go crazy. Somehow the full moon was cutting through the windows, and that would make him feel less crazy. He didn't want to go to jail. He proceeds to then, as the cops are arriving, and the British police sirens sound different than ours. They're odd. Well, back then, yeah. So they had them slowly arriving over a period of like good 10 minutes. He's explaining the whole thing, a la later the 80s horror sitcom Murder, She Wrote. Angela Lansbury, also English, explaining how the killer always explained at the last minute, this is what I'm going to do. Because I'm afraid of I don't want to go to jail. This is what I did, and obviously did it. And the other guy's like, oh shit, I have the knife. Of course he gets stabbed. Of course. Unlike Murder, She Wrote, you'd figure that, like, in 70-some episodes of that show, that one of the bad guys would just plug Angela Lansbury's character, Jessica Fletcher, because, like, it'd be like, why wouldn't he? He's like, oh, she's... And they figured that out, like, by the second or third season. They were like, yeah, maybe there should be another cop, like, outside, like, waiting to, like, stop the bad guy. Because the bad guy could just plug her after he explains the whole thing. It could be like, oh, okay, you figured it out. Ha, ha, ha. Oh, bang. No. Oh, it isn't James Bond, after all. If it was James Bond, then bad guy villain would explain everything, and then there would be a shootout, but neither of them could hit anything. Yeah, same kind of idea. Yeah, so yeah, fantasy. Yeah, horror fantasy. Yeah, and he's gonna stab the other lady. The lady runs out. He runs out into the woods, and apparently he's on his way out of the woods as the cops show up. Presumably they grabbed him at that point, hauled him off to prison. Yeah. Although there were kind of accessories to murder by burying the guy. So. Anyway, so that's the review of Haunted House of Horrors. Which turned out was not a ghost, as Vincent said. It was not a ghost. No, it was a straight up killer. Well, you figure that it was a straight up killer the minute there's a straight up killing in the story. It's like, okay, this has become a whodunit. It's a whodunit. It's like a Clue kind of thing. Yeah, so it's a whodunit. So there's no supernatural element. If he disappeared into a wall, then there'd be a supernatural element. Or if he was like discovered and like his head and taken off or something, it'd be a supernatural element. Whereas like, okay, he just gets killed. Yeah. All right, so that's the yeah. It wasn't bad. It just was kind of meh. Yeah, there have been better ones. Haunted house movies that are better. Yeah. I think that Rob Zombie was inspired by elements of this movie in House of a Thousand Corpses. Not House of the Dead. Not House. House of a Thousand Corpses. Similar partygoers go to this house where crazy shit happens. Of course, in that one, it's supernatural because the bad guy has powers and he's able to do stuff. So that's a little different, but I think he was in the genre, but it's basically inspired. It's like, okay, yeah, the genre of haunted house. Everyone gets taken out. Ha ha. And it's more like Clue. Yeah, more like Clue meets Murder She Wrote, but way before then. Meets a little Agatha Christie, a little Arthur Conan Doyle, a little bit of yeah, pretty much. A little bit of some of the other classics. It's not a classic though. There are numerous other ones you could watch, but this is Unofficial Creature Features. So,